Welcome this morning to our session. What I'm going to talk about is something interesting in a sense that we're talking about real data, whatever that means. Ideally, it's not alternative facts, it's real data. That's what I would recommend, though. And we're also going to talk about anonymization. That will mean that the moderator should not have introduced me because that's against any anonymization rule and regulation. But typically, as a speaker, you would have to be officially announced here, so there's no other option in this regard. But we feel like anonymization is a really important prerequisite for AI and machine learning. That was an outcome. You can argue whether this is actually true. I mean, give me some responses and questions afterwards. But at least we had a couple of workshops beginning of the year. And when the Austrian administration announced the year of digitalization this year. And as part of this year of digitalization, we had workshops on artificial intelligence with a variety of different stakeholders from the industry, from the educational sector, from the public sector, obviously, verifying the impact of artificial intelligence to these different sectors. And I think that was quite important and quite interesting to talk to experts, to talk to scientific experts, to talk to people who are really using the solutions, also to technicians, and to verify this. And we had an example from a project from Germany pointing out that there are 20 million documents available, in this case from a car manufacturing company, and they would have a lot of information in there, obviously, but primarily this information is all about car parts. So this is not really personalized information. This is not all about you and me. This is primarily about whatever is subject of a car. So, but with 20 million documents, that means 20 million information building blocks, or even more than that. You can do a lot in regards to artificial intelligence. The machine can learn a lot, to a certain extent, from all this case-based data. But if we are considering some of the, as we call it, life situations in Austria, for example, you as a citizen, you would have to deal with a particular situation which is somehow connected to the government. Like, you will figure out that in approximately a little less than 9 months, something important is going to happen. And hopefully, I mean, likely you're going to be very proud and happy that your wife or your partner is expecting, or you yourself. And this whole thing, this whole wonderful thing, natural thing, is going to turn into a life situation. That means a baby will be born, and it will be in kindergarten, and in the end it will be in school. So it's an overarching kind of life situation. But do we have enough information to provide appropriate information to the citizen? We have some general information all about this. But if it gets a little more complex, assuming we would like to use artificial intelligence for a chatbot or like some kind of digital assistant, this digital assistant needs some, intelligence. I mean, we probably already talked about it. Are these solutions really that intelligent? Maybe not. At least if the chatbot or the digital assistant has access to very limited data, very generalized data, the chatbot can answer eventually some few FAQs, frequently asked questions. But for that, you wouldn't necessarily need artificial intelligence. You can have an Excel sheet, with some corresponding answers, and that's pretty much it. So why would you need extensive artificial intelligence spending hundreds of thousands of euros for this? I wouldn't understand. So what I'm saying is, in this case, we might have 20 documents on this baby life situation, so to say, instead of 20 million. So what are we going to do? We can have the best possible AI and machine learning solution behind it, but it has little content. There's nothing nothing there. And we also realized if it comes down to anonymization, structured data is something you can anonymize quite well. But unstructured data, case data, this is the interesting meat, where there's also, this is just regular text, that's regular content you would know. This is where the meat's in. But you can't use this because it's full of personalized data. It's Mr. Miller and Frau Schulze and whomever. Yeah? So these are real names of real people in Austria or wherever country you're coming from. So the problem is we need to extract that, turn it into anonymized data. So this is real data, including personalized information, and versus anonymized data. And we feel like this can be an important impact at the end of the day, but you have to do it right, and you have to do it carefully, and you should not over-anonymize. Because if you're extracting too much relevant information from all this, it gets senseless. If it's very general information, Vienna is a wonderful city, you would say, well, what's that? I mean, you know that probably. So what's the value of this information? Very little. In a particular situation, you need more specific information if it gets more than just down to a frequently asked question. So what we looked into is there's a need of qualitative learning content in order to train an AI solution. What we wanted is a rather comprehensive anonymization standard, but also a at least semi-automated solution to anonymize personalized data. We need to define the parameters. We realized that if we had human beings sitting in front of non-personalized data yet, they would have to do that manually, first of all. And that means somebody has access to not yet anonymized data. So we had one client. He said, "Oh, Mr. Lichtenthaler, that anonymization thing is great. We love it. So we're going to just put all our client data on a CD-ROM or a DVD-ROM. Pretty cool digital, Put it on a DVD-ROM, and we're going to send it to you. And please, we trust you at the Federal Computing Center. Please, why don't you just go ahead and anonymize that?" I said, "No, please don't do it. Don't do it. It's against all GDPR terms and regulations. Don't do it." Oh, I thought we can trust the Federal Computing Center. I said, yeah, I mean, generally I would agree that you might be eventually, I mean, it's up to you, but I mean, you might actually want to trust the Federal Computing Center, but this is against the law, so don't do it. So we realized any manual activity, having a troop of students sitting there and anonymizing personalized data, this can't be the solution. I mean, this would be an option, a nice student's job. Come on, you would be sitting there and just annotating and deleting personalized data. Pretty cool job, huh? So you can do that, but I mean, that was probably not the way it was intended to be. So we thought we need some more, at least more automated, not fully automated eventually. So and there's an interesting law, so to say, there's an interesting information from the Data Security Authority in Austria, which is, they are corresponding with the other European Union data security authorities, and it's saying we need to have more information, but how are we actually going to do this? So it says, according to paragraph 17 of DSGVO, which is GDP, the European GDPR regulation, it says pretty clearly you do not necessarily have to destroy personalized data at the end of the term, at the end of a customer life cycle. You can actually anonymize that. Great. So the consequence, the conclusion out of this is logically, hey, we can use this. Because after anonymization, it's not personalized data anymore. That's cool. So all of a sudden, we would have tons of thousands of documents or content, information, building blocks, how we would call it. That's great. The question is, are we allowed to use that? And is the government allowed to sell that data, that anonymized data then? Question mark. Is the government going to be selling this to Amazon or to whomever? Making the big bucks out of this? Pretty cool e-commerce model, huh? Every government can make a shitload of money. Yeah, maybe that's not the way it's supposed to be. There's a common sense, in a sense that if you're using this type of data for something appropriate, for example, more specific information for a citizen as part of a chatbot or digital assistant, yeah, you might say so if the government was not going to sell that data, but would use it for not only internal purposes, but also to interact with the citizens or interact with corporations to give them better advice, better information. I think you would agree that's okay-ish. That's fine. But if the government was going to start selling this, different topic. So the other thing is, what does it mean, anonymization? It says here, it is appropriately anonymized if the whole effort is just, or if it's just with a disproportional effort to kind of reconstruct the data. So if it's relatively easy to verify who's behind that data. So if I'm anonymizing Hans Müller as a clear name, I shouldn't say anonymizing, it's just a pseudonymization. It's just saying Hans Müller, that's the term for it. If I just put instead of Hans Müller, I would put in Max Mustermann, like a sample John Doe, then this our term would be, this is just a pseudonymization. And if I was going to put that little content into Google, and I will automatically find Hans Müller again, then this is obviously not appropriately anonymized. So they are talking about a disproportional effort to reconstruct the data. That's appropriately anonymized, if it's only possible with enormous effort. But what is that, enormous? Can you tell me? What is enormous? I mean, is it enormous for you as developers and IT experts? You have much more knowledge how to do this. You can eventually even work with quantum computing. Wow, you can probably run it through the system for a couple of minutes through the quantum computer, and you will find out who I am. You will find it out, no problem. But so this disproportional effort and this whole lot of effort is not specified. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what does that exactly mean. And we can also say that to anonymize structured data and even some semi-structured data like balance sheets and those kind of stuff, this is still relatively easy to anonymize. In an Excel sheet, you might just want to delete this column with the names. It's not that easy actually, but kind of, yeah? But if it's unstructured data, if it's like content, case-based content, it's not that easy. And just to give you one little example on how complicated this could be, assuming you're using Bauer, that means farmer in German, or you were going to use the common name Taylor. So the tailor said, or the tailor would consider that this and that happened. So the tailor would typically mean, or you would consider that might be the tailors in general. They might point out that they're not going to get enough money for the suits they're selling or they're doing. Maybe that's a common statement, but it can also be a statement. The tailor, this guy called Taylor, Mr. Taylor. So you can imagine if I'm anonymizing Mr. Taylor, that's fine, because this can be eventually substituted with John Doe. But if the real meaning was the tailor as the general term for representing all the tailors in Austria or in Europe or whatever, if you were deleting or substituting tailor in this case, then it would say the I don't know what it is would say that. And then the whole sentence turns into bullshit. It has no meaning anymore. So that's the challenge. That's the challenge of all this. And that's what we have to take into respect. So we're working on a solution like that. We have something in the inbox. We have something which is not yet anonymized. We need to pre-check. We need to anonymize. And we would work on a counterattack to eventually even figure out something by some logic, not necessarily quantum computing, but something in the end of the day, we will verify this. And we also have to validate, that's quite important here, if it's not over-anonymized. If we're deleting Taylor, then it would be over-anonymized, and the value of this sentence, maybe even the value of the entire document, would be useless for any other artificial intelligence. Because if the chatbot was going to tell you the said that, then you don't have to ask the chatbot because that's just useless information. So as you can see, we have a phase 0, not yet anonymized data. We have an initial pseudonymization. This is just substituting the actual real names and maybe some direct references, like an ID or any other registration number or whatever it is. And then we have this disproportionality criteria. This criterion, we don't exactly know where disproportional effort would start. And it's also a question, what kind of technology should I look at if I'm talking about disproportional effort? Can I already look into quantum computing? What kind of technology are we talking about? Is it based upon the technology today or yesterday or tomorrow? So it's difficult. So that's the difficulty, that's the challenge if we're working on a standard. And as you can see, data quality or real meaning behind the data is going to decrease substantially here. Obviously, the data quality is decreasing, so it's over-anonymized. It's the GDPR conformity, the GDPR compliance is increasing, obviously, but to an extent where it makes absolutely no sense then at a certain point. Up there on the very top right side, it's wonderful, meaningless contents. It's like politicians talking, you know? Politicians are talking, oh yeah, everything is great and we have a wonderful country, and not really answering the question at all. This is on the top right side. You know what I'm talking about? You probably have that in each and every country you are from, yeah? Or, for example, the Social Democrats in Austria, they lost by almost 10% in the last general election. And the leader of the Social Democratic Party, she said, "Oh, we're on the right track." And everybody said, "Huh? I mean, you're on the right..." No, and you don't really mean what you're saying, yeah? So, you know, but you understand what we're doing. So finally, to get to a conclusion, how many minutes do I still have? All right. So you are also partly techie, that's what I got. So you would understand, so what is this guy talking about? How's this going to work technically? You know, how's that, what's the real meaning behind it? So we understand that someone, a human being, maybe some technology needs to have access to the initially not anonymized data. Yeah? So that's the challenge. That's like this client who was going to send that DVD-ROM to us. Don't do it. We have to kind of throw a little bit of a piece of software across the firewall, and we would enable our client to attach that, to dock that software right on the database to be anonymized, so that they can have a initial pseudonymization here, so that at least, you know, the Hans Müller and Lily Meyer is extracted, is not there, or it's substituted by some general Jane Doe or John Doe. Then this is not anonymized to the extent I was explaining. This is just, there's no direct connection to an actual real name, but it's not anonymization as we would call it. That's why we created a technical solution and a kind of a quarantine, like you would have in specific medical situations. I'm not going to get into this. I'm no medical expert. But this is rather the data quarantine, where this software would deliver the pseudonymized data, and we would attack that pseudonymized data to a certain extent if there was any way to reverse that, if there was any way of an opportunity to reconstruct that data eventually, if that's possible, then we have to work on anonymization. Sandra Berra in my team, she's responsible for this project, and we were coming up. She was talking about, you know, an example. How can there be a reconstruction? And the example was, we were talking about an accident and a red Ferrari. You can imagine in a small town in Austria, and maybe in whatever country you're coming from, a red Ferrari is like not a common car. Let's put it this way. Even in Austria, even the richest country of the world, it's not a common car. And if it's like a little village of a population of 500, then you would just need to call someone in this little village and say, so who's the owner of the red Ferrari? You will figure it out quite simply. I mean, in a couple of minutes, just calling one or two people, you will figure it out. No problem. So probably red Ferrari as an information, even though you pseudonymized Hans Müller as the owner of the red Ferrari, that doesn't work. That's not enough, so to say. So I have to consider either two options. Either I'm going to talk about a sports car. If sports car is relevant here to the case, so was that an accident with a sports car, and does it really matter that it was a sports car, or could it just been a regular Volkswagen or whatever, and it doesn't really matter whether it was a Ferrari? Yeah, maybe it had at least a connection that it was a high-speed car, but you can say a sports car would be fine. You don't have to mention Ferrari, particularly the brand. Or the other option would be to say, if you're referring to a little town in Upper Lower Austria, something like that, then you would argue, is it really necessary to mention this little village? Maybe not. Maybe it would just be fine that it's a town in Lower Austria. That might just be fine. But this is this particular information which might not necessarily be subject to automation, full-scale automation. This might be something where a human being has selected information and would need to verify whether this information was subject to verification, and how can you eventually deconstruct this, or how can you actually turn it into something appropriate, so not over-anonymized, but still usable, but also not reconstructible, so to say. I think you understand the concept. So it's that privacy checker, that additional level where we need to figure out if it's not neither over-anonymized nor too simple to figure it out. And this is how we're approaching this. And certainly we have to adapt this privacy checker. We need to adapt this to the latest standard, the latest technology coming up. That's a challenge. And maybe in 5 years, we're going to have technology which is way beyond the one where we have today, specifically in artificial intelligence. And that's why we need to verify whether we're on the right track, and it might be even an issue in 5 years. Today, we feel like it's possible. So we are working on that kind of software solution and to verify that content. And then, but you can imagine, if we were going to do it right, and if this little section here is appropriately worked out, and if the legal experts were going to say, yes, that's appropriately anonymized, not too much, not too limited, then we're on the right track. And then you can imagine the value of that content. That unstructured data is enormous, and you would have, you as AI experts maybe much more than I am an AI expert, you can have, all of a sudden you can have unstructured data you can work with, and you have much more learning content for whatever it is. One last comment would be, yes, we're going to have great content, not politicians blah blah, but we would have real meaningful content for your AI applications you're working on. Great, please do something great, something appropriate with it. But we can also consider something which is almost forgotten. You know what it is? Natural intelligence. This hard drive here, you remember? This used to be existing. Some intelligence up here. We can even work on some additional learning content for people who would start to work at a governmental agency. They can learn from previous cases. Via anonymization, they would have much more learning content all of a sudden. And you can extract cases which are anonymized but representing pretty much the reality. You probably know from your studies that there are cases out there you have to write a thesis on which are very theoretically constructed. You know, quite far away from reality. So what I'd like to work on, even with artificial intelligence, to work on learning content, realistic learning content for the natural intelligence, for increasing the natural intelligence. That's my goal, and I hope you can continue, and I hope you're also going to talk to Sandra Berra. She's here to understand how we do this, how we can collaborate, and happy to ask some questions. But I hope you were able to understand our concepts. Thank you so far.
Thank you, Matthias. Would you like to maybe go to your contact page so that everyone can write them down? And then in case they have questions, they can contact you, Matthias Lichtenthaler. So I think we have time for 2 questions from Slido.
Yes.
Can we switch to Slido, please? So let's go with the most asked one. Is there any automated approach to anonymize natural language records?
As I said, it is if you're defining automated as something fully automated, no human interaction, I would say tricky. If it's very unstructured information, yeah, natural language records, I would say a higher level of automation is possible, but some human verification might still be necessary. Maybe some even better systems coming up in the future, they might understand this is the tailor in general, as representing all the tailors, and this is potentially Mr. Tailor. But today, I still have a little percentage of uncertainty, so that's why I would need a human being. So yes, it's extensively automated, but not to 100%.
Okay. The other question, should every sensitive real data be hashed or encrypted somehow?
I would say yes. It's a question, again here, how to define sensitive. The consequence of the Data Security Association or the authority is if you are anonymizing appropriately, whatever appropriately means, if you're anonymizing appropriately, I wouldn't call it sensitive data anymore. So then you would allowed in a certain framework, let's put it this way, not selling it, but you're allowed to use it for a good cause, for an appropriate cause. But if you had to keep, for some reason, this sensitive data, specifically personalized data, but even other sensitive data, then you should definitely be, it should be hashed or encrypted. We are working on a couple of solutions in this area, so I would agree, but as I said, this type of data, appropriately anonymized, is not, to me, it's not sensitive anymore. We can argue, we can have an interesting discussion afterwards.
Okay. Let's just squeeze in one more last question in there. So I think this is really interesting. Because I ponder with this also a lot, and how can GDPR compliance actually increase? Great question, shouldn't it be binary? Either you're compliant or not.
Yeah, I mean, ideally it's binary. If you were able to explain to me exactly what it means, inappropriate or enormous effort to deconstruct the data. If you can define that absolutely precisely, it's either yes, it's appropriately anonymized, or it's not appropriately anonymized. And then it's pretty crystal clear. If it's appropriate, then it's according to any kind of GDPR compliance. And if not, it's not. But the problem is to define whatever is appropriate and which technology are you referring to. That's the challenge. So I'm definitely pro GDPR compliance increase, no doubt. But I doubt that we can turn it into something simply binary. If you had a solution for this, approach me. I think we can get billionaires easily.
I think that's a great close to our session right now. Please, can we go back to the contact? So I'm sure there's a lot of people with a lot of questions or great ideas. Please contact Matthias with great ideas. And yeah, thank you very much, Matthias.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.